Life has been a battlefield, hasn't it? Many of us face situations that seem impossible to endure. The heart fills with anguish, the mind drowns in worries, and the soul seems to falter. Anxiety begins to whisper, "You won't make it. This is too much for you." But dear brother, dear sister, God never promised that the journey would be easy, but He did promise to be by our side every step of the way. God's word reminds us in Philippians 4 verse 13, "I can do all things through Him who strengthens me." You see, it's not about our strength. It's about Christ's power within us. How many times do we feel incapable in the face of battles? Think of David, a young shepherd with no experience in warfare, facing an armed giant named Goliath. Anxiety could have overtaken his heart, but he refused to listen to the voice of fear and trusted in God. When Goliath looked at David and despised him, David confidently declared, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." 1 Samuel 17 verse 45. David's victory wasn't in his skill, but in his trust in the Lord. And what about Daniel? Thrown into the lion's den for not giving in to idolatry. Daniel could have been consumed by anxiety, but he chose to trust in God. He spent the whole night among the lions, yet no harm touched him because the Lord was with him. God sent His angel to shut the mouths of the lions, showing that those who trust in the Lord, even when facing the impossible, will never be forgotten. Today, I ask you, where is your trust? Have you allowed anxiety to steal your peace? Or are you resting in the God who never fails? Psalm 34 verse 18 tells us, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." God is not distant from our problems. He is present very close, right beside those who are discouraged. His word says He never abandons us. Many times, anxiety arises when we lose sight of who God is. It's easy to be overwhelmed by fear when we forget who governs the universe. A powerful example of this happened with Peter, one of Jesus' disciples. When Peter saw Jesus walking on water, filled with faith, he asked to go to Him. Peter began to walk on the water, but when he took his eyes off Jesus and looked at the wind and the waves, he began to sink. Anxiety took hold of him, but in that moment, he cried out to the Lord, and Jesus immediately grabbed him, saying, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Matthew 14:31. In the same way, when we focus on circumstances instead of Christ, we begin to sink. But when we look to Him, we find the strength to walk on the most turbulent waters of life. When we lose sight of who God truly is, when we stop contemplating the greatness, power, and love of our Creator, we make room for fear and insecurity to take over our hearts. Anxiety is like a fog that clouds our spiritual vision, preventing us from seeing the majesty of God, who sustains all things with His mighty hand. It makes us forget that the God who created the heavens, the earth, and everything in them is the same God who stands by our side day after day. And it is very easy, brothers and sisters, to be overtaken by fear and anxiety when we take our eyes off Jesus and begin focusing on the circumstances around us. Anxiety starts to dominate when we allow life's difficulties and challenges to become greater than our trust in God. This reminds me of Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples. Think about this for a moment. Peter, an ordinary man, a fisherman, witnessed incredible miracles and saw the power of Jesus firsthand. He was in the boat with the other disciples when he saw Jesus walking on water, defying the laws of nature, manifesting His power over the physical world. It was a supernatural vision, something humanly impossible. And Peter, filled with sincere faith at that moment, asked to go to Jesus. "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." Matthew 14:28. Jesus simply said, "Come." And so, Peter took a step of faith. He got out of the boat and began to walk on the water. That in itself is a great miracle. He was no longer walking on the physical plane, as we are accustomed to, but he was experiencing the supernatural, moved by his trust in Christ's power. Now think about this. How many of us, at some point in life, have been like Peter, full of faith, believing we can do the impossible because God is by our side? Peter experienced God's power in an extraordinary way. However, something happened along the way. He began to notice the strong wind, the waves around him, and suddenly, the faith that kept him standing on the water gave way to fear. Peter took his eyes off Jesus and fixed them on the circumstances around him. He looked at the wind, at the fury of the sea, and anxiety overwhelmed him. Fear paralyzed him, and at that moment, he began to sink. The feeling of being out of control, of the situation being too much for him, caused Peter to lose focus on what mattered most. Jesus was right in front of him. The Master, the Son of God, the one who has all power in heaven and on earth, the Prince of Peace, was there calling him to move forward. And what happened next? As Peter began to sink, he cried out for help. "Lord, save me!" He shouted in desperation, and immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. The readiness of Jesus to save Peter reveals God's loving heart. Even when our strength fails, even when our faith wavers, Jesus is always near, ready to lift us up, to rescue us from the storm that threatens to drown us. And at that moment, Jesus, looking at Peter, said, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Matthew 14:31. It wasn't a harsh rebuke, but a loving correction, a reminder that if Peter had kept his eyes fixed on Jesus, he would not have sunk. Peter's faith was small, but Jesus' love was great, and he held him up, just as he does with us in our daily battles. Brothers, how many times has this happened to us? How many times have we started well, walking in faith, trusting in God, but along the way, we allow the waves of circumstances to distract us. We start to focus on the difficulties, financial problems, illnesses, broken relationships, challenges at work, and just like Peter, we begin to sink. Anxiety makes us feel as if we are drowning in a sea of uncertainties, fear, and insecurity. But the truth is, just as Jesus was there for Peter, he is with us. He won't let us sink. Once again, the question is not whether the sea is stormy, but whether our eyes are fixed on Jesus. When we look to him, we find the strength to walk over the most turbulent waters of life. When we keep our focus on Christ, the waves may be large and the wind may be strong, but we are not dominated by fear because we know in whom we have believed. It is essential to understand that anxiety has no power to destroy us unless we allow it to. When we take our focus off Jesus and place our attention on the storms of life, we give room for fear to consume us. But when we keep our eyes on Jesus, when we remember who he is, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one who conquered death and sin, we are strengthened. No matter how strong the storm is, no matter how fierce the waves may be, we remain firm because Christ is our anchor. He sustains us, guides us, and takes us safely to the other side of the storm. Therefore, dear brothers and sisters, if today you are going through a storm in your life, if the waves of anxiety and fear seem to be surrounding you, remember Peter. Remember that Jesus is right in front of you, calling you to continue walking on the water, to trust him, and to not give in to fear. Keep your eyes fixed on him, because the strength is not in the circumstances around you, but in the one who sustains you, who never abandons you, and who loves you with an eternal love. Now, think about this. Did you know that in 2010, Chilean miners were trapped in a mine 700 meters underground for 69 days? The chances of survival were minimal. They were in complete darkness, not knowing if they would ever be rescued. But do you know what sustained them? Faith. They believed that God was with them, even in the depths. And miraculously, all 33 miners were rescued alive. This story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, when it seems like there is no way out, God is present and able to work miracles. Another incredible story is that of Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch Christian who, during World War II, helped hide Jews from the Nazis. She and her family were arrested, and Corey was sent to a concentration camp. In the midst of so much pain and suffering, she could have given in to despair. But Corey remained steadfast in her faith, believing that God was in control. And do you know what she often said? Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. Even in the most terrible circumstances, Corey trusted in God, and he gave her the strength to persevere. Whether it be Daniel in the lion's den, David before Goliath, Peter walking on water, or the Chilean miners trapped deep in the earth, the message is clear. Do not give in to anxiety. Do not allow fear to steal your trust in God. Anxiety is a lie from the enemy to distance us from the truth that God is faithful, that He is with us, and that He never abandons us. Remember Isaiah 41 verse 10. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. True peace doesn't come from the absence of problems, but from the presence of God in our lives. When we allow Him to be our refuge, our strength, we find rest for our souls. No matter what you are facing, place your trust in Him. For the one who believes in the Lord can boldly declare, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Philippians 4 verse 13. Now, I want to invite you to make a choice today, a choice to live by faith, not by fear, to trust in the God who loves you and who cares about every detail of your life. Be strong and courageous. Reject the lies of anxiety and stand firm in the truth that God is with you. He guides you, protects you, and sustains you. Anxiety may whisper that you are alone, but God's voice is louder, saying, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Hebrews 13 verse 5. Do not be discouraged or afraid, for the Lord Almighty will be with you in any situation, but flee from disobedience. Follow divine instructions and enjoy the abundant life in Jesus. Believe, and nothing will be lacking. I pray that you remember every day that God is near, that He sees you, hears you, and loves you deeply. Do not give up. Do not give in to discouragement. With Christ by your side, you can overcome any situation. And remember, those who believe are never alone. Now, share this message with someone who needs to hear it. Like, comment, and subscribe to the channel to continue receiving words of faith and hope. May God bless you powerfully.